Good morning, everyone. In this video, I will give a brief introduction into the topic of globalization, which is the main topic of discussion for our course. The term globalization is a very complex term that keeps changing, so there are different definitions depending on the framework that you look at this term through. Um, People are trying to get at the root of what this term actually means and the way that it works. So there are people looking at globalization from different places, from different perspectives. So I have included some of those definitions in this video. And at the end, when I ask you questions, just make sure that you need to have a sense of your own definition of what globalization means to you. So, what is globalization? And before I show you some of those definitions, I want you to look at the actual word and the way that it is structured. Uh, the, the ending of the word Asian means the process of. So, visualization, it's the process of seeing, the process of presenting something visually. Globalization, then it's the process of something interacting with the world, correct? Global, meaning the world, the globe. So the first definition that I want to give you is the definition that is in the most general, in my opinion. So globalization, it's just a process of becoming global. What is becoming global? You are becoming global. Your community is becoming global. Your city, your state, your nation. Every aspect of our societies are interconnected. So globalization means all of those aspects, goods, services, people, becoming a part of the world. Even though the term globalization is something that for the last 3 decades, I'm going to say 4 decades almost, has permeated our language and our discussions. With the end of the Cold War, for example. We started once the Cold War ended, this standoff between Russia and the United States. We start to see this discussion of globalization now that we don't have this standoff, this ideological standoff between these two powers. Then the conversation of globalization became more and more part of our discussions. But globalization has been taking place for centuries, has been taking place ever since we've had societies, power societies, just power states. Just think of any empire in our history. Think of the Roman Empire. Think of the French Empire with Napoleon in the early 19th century. These um, these processes, the Roman Empire and the French Empire under Napoleon, these are forms. These are forms of trying to make the world more global, make the world one, making the world closer to each other by conquering, of course, right? Um, just think of colonization, for example. It's connecting the world. There are good aspects, there are bad aspects, there are negative aspects to globalization. Globalization is neither good nor bad, um, but the it is a process that has been taking place for centuries. It is nothing new, and it's the world just becoming smaller in a way. So the world, with globalization, the world is understood as one single place. That's the, uh, I guess, the most general definition that I can give you. Um, Talking about that ending, zation, right? Um, and how it means the process of. Then you have these processes that are globalization like. it's this same movement, right? The same movement towards everything becoming like something else, everything becoming one thing, right? Everything becoming like one single place, like the term Americanization, right? Or McDonaldization, which is a term used in business, where you have all of your processes being the same all over the world. Or Creolization, where two different things, two different cultures meet and they become one, different from what it started, but a new thing, a new single thing. Transnationalization, same idea. Um, Balkanization is around the Balkan area, all right, in Northern Europe, and about this, all of these countries becoming one thing, right, becoming one entity. So globalization is a term that we used to talk about the world, but there are other processes that have that same movement towards different things becoming one single thing. Different parts of the world, different parts of a of an industry becoming one, right? So the term globalization shares that same sort of movement, that same sort of concept as these that I list right here. And I give you a bit of a definition on what these are. And I'm going to make these slides available for you. Okay. Um, so if we look at globalization and nations, um, um, if we look at globalization and corporations, globalization and people, globalizations and objects, okay? Darren Byrne defines globalization as that sort of connection, that sort of relationship, how something relates to the world, that connection, and that it is unmediated by the nation state. That means that government is not influencing that connection between a person, a corporation, on a work of art, between that thing and the world. That means that it's not being manipulated, right? So globalization is that process of becoming global, but globalization can also be that connection. What is that connection about? What is at the root of that connection between a person and the world? Yes, between a corporation and the world, or a work of art and the world. So, for example, for you as a person, how does your lifestyle and identity relate to that idea of seeing the world as one place? Are you that type of person that talks about about yourself as a citizen of the world, for example? So, how does your lifestyle and identity relate to this concept? About being American, and about being a citizen of the world, for example. Right? Think of traveling, about family living abroad, about music and films that you consume, or who or what you follow on Instagram, what hashtags you follow. How is your identity? Is your identity a sort of globalized sort of identity? I would like you to think on those things, and you will have an opportunity to express those thoughts on our discussion boards. Okay? And I want you to ask yourself how you are connected globally. Are you connected globally in one way or another? How so? Think of the national news. Think of the grocery store. How are you connected to this global market, to this global sense of living? So, the globalization of the world, there are these two movements, there are these two processes happening: compression and intensification. So, the globalization of the world refers to the compression of the world, meaning the world is getting smaller, and the intensification of consciousness of the world as a whole, meaning we start to see a sort of unified concept of what it means to be one, to be global, right? So the compression of the world is smaller, but then we see a sort of definition of what that would be, and that's Roland Robertson, and that's his take on globalization in the world. So globalization is about human interconnections that have assumed global proportions. So it's not only, for Roland Robertson, it's not about a person connecting with Instagram, with a corporation, with a song. It's a person connecting to another person through that person's work, through that person's art, through that person's contribution to the world. So globalization is about connecting to other human beings, but this interconnection has assumed global proportions, meaning you don't know this person, you may never know this person that has created something that you covet, right? Or something that you enjoy, or something that is part of your life, but that connection exists nonetheless. So for Roland Robertson, it's about humans connecting with other humans through their products or services. And in the future, as we move towards more discussions regarding globalization, we'll talk about what globalization means. Sometimes globalization is a bad word. Some people say it's a good thing. Some people say it's a bad thing. Some people say, like if you go to the dollar store, globalization allows you to buy something for $1, right? Made in China, for example. But globalization is also the cause of maybe some inequalities when it comes to paying people the right amount of wages in China. These are the trade-offs that we make, right? These are the advantages and disadvantages. These are the perks of being part of a globalized nation, but there are some negative effects to having those advantages of being in a globalized world. So we will discuss those because they are tricky. And again, I repeat, globalization cannot be defined as good or bad. It's just a process that's happening. And we need to take charge of how that happens. We need to be socially conscious so that globalization is done fairly. So we will keep discussing the term of globalization. But just to continue, just want to say that globalization has always been with us as a society. We're always kind of moving towards the process of connecting. For people, globalization just means connecting. Right? Global consciousness. You think of the how we're trying to connect when we think of ourselves as part of a nation, or when we think if you are religious and that you follow a certain credence. This is the same movement towards becoming one sort of community. Think of civilization, think of race, and how we are part of these communities and how we are moving. This is the same movement. There is a global consciousness when it comes to nation, when it comes to religion, when it comes to civilization and race and other things, where we create one single thing out of many, right? Different people from different backgrounds come together under the same umbrella. So that same process that's happening when we think about race, civilization, religion, nation is happening in globalization. This idea of global consciousness. Okay, and I think I will leave it up to here now. I don't want to make this video too long. The next time, for my next video, I will talk about these two processes that are happening in globalization. this idea of interconnectedness and the awareness of our relationship to the world as a single space, which we already kind of discussed a bit. Okay? Well, thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay? Thank you. Bye bye.